Human beings, throughout the ages, harbor famished souls. The chaotic context in which they find themselves placed is an open invitation to find meaning and fulfill the soul. For the world in which they reside is abundant with temporarily satisfying artifacts of pleasurable worth. The self, as an agent of the soul, bears an appetite that seeks fulfillment in these artifacts, in order to resolve the inner turmoil of feeling dissonant, incomplete, and empty within both external and internal worlds. The scope of these artifacts spans from the simple, such as tangible amenities which satisfy physical desires, to the complex, such as meaning constructs that satisfy existential and spiritual desires. As human progress gave way to more complicated necessities, institutions took up the mantle for sating the appetite of the self. Religion offered consolation to the four existential crises of death, meaning-making, isolation, and responsibility. The solution of faith was sufficient until the world became more empirical. With the introduction of psychoanalysis, religion was left high and dry and under fire. Though some philosophers and psychologists, like William James, Carl Jung, and Nietzsche, postulated a much-needed and reformed modern take on faith, the explanatory power of science and reason became dominant. At this moment, there began an inward clash that questioned the reality of the self. What is it, and how does it function to serve human needs? Sigmund Freud argues that the self is driven by unconscious primitive desires innate to all human beings. These drives, if left unchecked, unresolved, and unconquered, would spiral humanity down the road that leads to corruption and malice. As a result, due to the rise in popularity of psychoanalysis and historically tense global affairs, the government took responsibility to harness and suppress these drives, often for the good of the state at the expense of the less powerful. Neil Postman, in the writing of Amusing Ourselves to Death, keenly noticed that control can be maintained in one of two fashions: Orwellian or Huxleyan. Orwellian government rules out of fear, as George Orwell's acclaimed novel 1984 clearly depicts. Tyranny of this sort subjugates its citizens by forcing utter dependence on higher government, or else calamity ensues. Truth is framed and manufactured to inform the masses of an alternate reality, a reality that artificially fulfills its subjugates. The empty self conforms out of terror and a will to survive. Huxleyan, on the other hand, is the reversal of Orwellian oppression. In reference to Huxley's utopian novel Brave New World, control is assumed by inflicting pleasure and abundance upon the masses rather than terror. The documentary The Century of the Self emphasizes that the sheer quantity of amenities numbs the masses into docile consumers. In this way, people will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. The advancement of technology has made it so what once was important now becomes a spectacle of entertainment. What is easily shown replaces what is easily thought by the public. The nuances of language get lost in performance, connection gets replaced with fandom, and reality, as the viewer now consumes it, gets contorted within the silver screen. In this way, Huxleyan oppression is that of pleasure and blissful ignorance of the truth, which has now become trivially irrelevant. It is much easier to recognize Orwellian than it is to recognize Huxleyan oppression. The reason for this is simple. Who will resist unending amenities, the eye-catching spectacles, and an abundance of commodities to consume? Resisting Orwellian oppression is apparent. Not one human wishes to be subordinate to a tyrant. However, in resisting the tyranny of fear, we entrap ourselves in the Huxleyan reality of instant gratification, objectification, and egotism to satiate our starving and empty selves.